let's do the book of Isaiah. So it is a substantial work, the book of Isaiah. It is a magnificent book of prophecy and of fulfillment and some history and just incredible book. It is so rich. It's been called the fifth gospel because of its rich content specifically about Jesus, about the suffering servant, the Messiah whom God would send. We look at chapters 52 and 53 that we do at Holy Week and Passion Week. By his wounds we are healed. The prophecies about the virgin birth, those things are in there. He should be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. The chapter 6 call of Isaiah, where he sees the throne room of God and the angels calling to one another, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God of Sabaoth, heaven and earth are full of your glory, like we sing in our communion liturgy. Just so much of what the church's regular life is about flows from the book of Isaiah. It's because it is such a substantial work, we're not going to go through it verse by verse. I promise. We're going to do it in chunks. Just kind of in this section, they talk about these things. Here's a few highlights, that kind of idea, just to make sure we can move through things. So, it's an interesting literary setup, structure to everything. There's verse 1 that just sort of sets up the whole preamble to the whole thing, and then the next verses and then 5 chapters sort of set up this setting into which Isaiah is being called to worship, and then chapter 6 is when he's actually called to be a prophet at that point. But to set the tone or to set the stage for Isaiah and his work and the ministry that he will have, you have verse 1 that says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So immediately we're anchored into a real time and place kind of situation. We know the when, we know the where, we know the who that he is interacting with and involved with. And so we'll get some more specifics about those things, but just sort of setting up that time period for Isaiah. Who was the man, Isaiah? He ministered from about 740 BC. That's the year King Uzziah died. And he ministered for about 60 years. It's a long prophetic ministry that he had. He outlived 4 different kings, which is pretty extraordinary as well. He's listed as the son of Amoz, not Amos, which is the prophet, but with a Z, or it might be a shortening of Amaziah, which could mean that there's some speculation, is he actually King Uzziah's brother's son, like the king's nephew, maybe? There's some question about whether Amos means Amaziah, who was the king's brother, but it's possible. We know that he was a priest. His call in chapter 6 comes while he is in the temple of God, administering incense at the altar, and so we know that he is a priest, so he's of the tribe of Levi. There are a number of contemporary prophets who are also at work during his 60 years, including the prophet Amos, also Hosea and Micah. And then the kings during his ministry that we saw from the first verse there: Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So we're about 700 years before the birth of Christ. The kingdom of Israel is divided into the north and the south, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom being 10 tribes, and then the southern kingdom being the tribe of Judah. You got Levites kind of scattered between the two of them. But they are a divided kingdom. Sometimes they're working together. Often they're at odds with one another. And there's going to be prophecy toward, and then fulfillment of, and then promises about the exile of the northern and southern kingdoms that is coming, and why that's going to happen, who's going to execute it, and then who's going to bring them back. In 722, the northern kingdom will be conquered and carried off into Babylon. And then, Joe, we got a handout right here. Will be carried off. And then the southern kingdom will follow later on, but that's after Isaiah's death. The book of Isaiah, it's 66 chapters long, so it's a substantial book as far as the number of chapters, and then it's the second most quoted book in the New Testament. Anybody want to guess what the most quoted book in the New Testament from the Old is? The Psalms. Very good. Very good. More Psalms. I think there's like 60-some Psalm references, and there's like 50-some Isaiah references. So it's quite a lot. Authorship. I'm very comfortable in saying it was Isaiah the prophet, that he's the one that wrote it. There is and has been a lot of ink spilled over the debate of the authorship of Isaiah, especially starting in the 1700s, 1800s, and into the 20th century now, the 21st century. It's kind of gone in cycles of there's division about it. Now there's kind of a resurgence of, well, maybe there is a unity within the book, and this is all by liberal scholars, I should say. Conservative scholars who take the Bible seriously, like the Missouri Synod does and things. We've always been firm that it's Isaiah the prophet wrote the whole book. Yes, there are stylistic differences. Yes, there are vocabulary differences. Yes, there is a tone of the message that's different from one section to another. But when you have a 60-year ministry, if somebody took sermons I wrote when I was just 20 years ago, starting off as a pastor, now they might say, oh, that's a different person. And in a lot of ways, they're right. Or to a different audience, and just all these different things that are happening. I'd say most things written before 2001, September 11th, 2001, cultural commentary, became irrelevant on September 11th, 2001. And then everything after that had a different tone. Same authors, same all those things, but everything's going to be different about it. Same thing in Isaiah's life. We've got 60 years here that he's ministering. There's going to be distinction between these different vocabulary and character, all those different things. Gene?
Yeah, I would like your take after studying it on there's some suggestion that it may have been a scribe, that he couldn't write himself because of one physical thing or another, and that there may have been somebody that wrote it down for him.
Yeah. So that's another possibility, is that there were things that he wrote himself personally at one point in his life. Another time it was something that he dictated because he wasn't physically able to write anymore, eyesight, these kinds of things. So somebody else wrote it down for him. There's also a sense that since a lot of this is written in the present tense, and then you got 60 years worth of that though, and then it's compiled into one cohesive book. So the liberal scholars will say, well, because there's such distinction between these sections, clearly somebody came and took these writings, whoever wrote them in the first place, and then somebody else came along and put them all together into a particular order. Not taking into consideration that it might have been Isaiah that did that, that he was the one that redacted them all together and combined these things. That's entirely realistic. That he, when he was writing about his his call and his vision in the heavenly throne room. He wrote that down, and that story was continued and shared. And then later on, he was compiled in with the rest of the things, the accounts of what happened with Hezekiah, and then the other prophecies when he received those, and receiving those prophecies helped these things make more sense, and so he rearranged that order of things. Yeah, absolutely. All that is, none of that demands that it had to be multiple people or multiple editors or all these sorts of things. It could absolutely be consistent with what the witness of the book itself is that it's one author. It's all in the voice of one particular author. The book definitely has there's a number of ways to outline the book and sort of say, well, it's this section, then this section, then this section. And there's clearly a change at chapter 40. Chapters 1 through 39 are certainly one part, and then 40 through 66 is got a number of different characters in there too, different genres in there as well. But again, that's just, there were two different purposes of those sections. And so, just like there's 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, if we have the same authors, you could just say, well, 1st and 2nd Isaiah is not so unrealistic, but they kept it all together on one scroll, so it's just Isaiah. And that's fine. That's fine as well. The problem that really begins the discussion about authorship for the liberal scholars is the issue of prophecy. That they say, the things that Isaiah is saying about what will happen to the northern kingdom, be taken into exile, and then the southern kingdom, and then being restored again, and even naming Cyrus, the Persian, who wouldn't be on the scene for more than 100 years after Isaiah is gone, to name him specifically, the liberal scholars just can't accept that prophecy means, sort of supernatural revelation from God of future events, as though somehow that's not possible. They take that possibility out of the equation, and they got to figure out, well, after it happened, somebody went back and wrote it in. Or it's a prophet. God gave him that revelation, and which is what we have. So if we take the Bible seriously and in context and its original intention and language and things, we have no issue with Isaiah being the author and the prophet who did receive foreknowledge. One of my commentaries I'm reading describe the work of a prophet is both to foreknow, but also to foretell of what's going to be going on. They're given a revelation of something for the purpose of proclaiming to God's people for a particular purpose. Kevin?
So do those liberal scholars think that somebody went back and edited the Dead Sea Scrolls to make the prophecies line up with Jesus afterward, since they predate him?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that are the ones that have Greek editions of the Gospels and things like that, that's a whole different set of scholarship there as well, as far as source documents and things. But like the Isaiah scroll that we have here is about 100 BC, so about 100 years before Jesus was born, and it's part of the Dead Sea Scrolls there and things. So it was a large space of time there as well. But yeah, it almost becomes nonsensical at that point when they're sort of like, well, they could have possibly known what was going to happen in the future, except God says He tells them. So they can't buy that. So, which is why it's false teaching, why we reject it. So here is a way to outline the book of Isaiah, chapters 1 through 12. He's preaching law and gospel to the nation of Israel. In 13 through 27, he's preaching law and gospel to the Gentile nations, in particular the ones that God is about to destroy because of their ungodliness. 28 to 35 is sort of a preaching and discourse on how only Yahweh can save, preaching to Samaria, kind of northern kingdom stuff, and Jerusalem. 36 to 39 becomes a historical commentary on how God saves Hezekiah from the Assyrians. So we get the account of that Hezekiah had from the Kings and Chronicles, that Hezekiah had a tunnel that provided water into the city of Jerusalem. They were able to withstand the siege of the Assyrians because of that. And you can actually still visit Hezekiah's tunnel in Jerusalem. See the aqueduct, if you will, that kept water on the inside of the walls. It's pretty incredible. Real factual things. Chapters 40 to 48, again, a commentary and proclamation on how Yahweh is the one true God. Then 49 to 66 become very theological in their character. 49 through 57 is the suffering servant songs, which are about the Messiah. This is where we get chapters 52 and 3 about my servant shall be high and lifted up, and he shall draw all nations to himself, and he will be a man of sorrows and acquainted with griefs, and by his wounds we are healed. About all those various things in there. And then 58 through 66 is a collection of various visions of prophecies that he received at different times. None of this is really necessarily chronological. Keep that in mind as well. Part of it, maybe up to the Hezekiah stuff, but after that it becomes less, it's not so chronological. You might have received these prophecies up inside those other areas and things, so you can't necessarily read it all front to back chronologically. But he gets visions of future blessedness, of the restoration of the nations, and even all the way up to the end time and the resurrection of the body when the Messiah comes again. It's kind of a full view of all what's ahead in the people of God. Sometimes they'll divide Isaiah into 3 sections, 1 through 39, and then like 40 to 57, and then 58 to 66. But again, that's just trying to sort out different reasons to say it wasn't one author. So it's not very helpful. So the Isaiah scroll is, anybody know what language? It's Hebrew. And this was found in the Dead Sea area, the Dead Sea Scrolls, area of Qumran, near the Dead Sea, up in these hillsides where there were these caves, almost look like beehives kind of thing, with lots of holes up there. And so they, this Qumran, the city of Qumran, that region, there were a Jewish sect that were there that were very intent on preserving the various Hebrew writings, and not just ones that were scriptural, but lots of different Hebrew writings and of the Jews and things, and then also leading into the New Testament era. And one day, I think it was in the 50s, a Bedouin shepherd boy is just kind of trolling along and doing what little boys will do, and he threw rocks up into the caves, and they heard something shatter. And he knew he was in trouble. They go up there and they find all these jars, these clay jars up there, and you'll see in the video I'm going to show kind of the scale of them, but kind of these tall, narrow jars with a lid, and inside were all these different scrolls and documents of various states of repair and disrepair, some able to be opened and some not able to be unrolled, some just fragments and chunks that have fallen off. Kind of like when you find a stack of old newspapers or things like that. But now imagine thousands of years. What's really extraordinary about the Dead Sea Scrolls is that we go from having the oldest copy of Scripture, we go from it being from about 1000 AD to it, we jump back more than 1,000 years to more original copies, if you will. And what's extraordinary about it is that they match. Other than maybe some spelling differences and some explainable transpositions of things as they wrote. The books that we have received are the books that were there. And it's just, you don't have to even watch sort of a progression of things. You literally go from, super close to the originals to 1,000 years later, and you got this whole thing that we can see that there's this continuity there. It was really just a magnificent discovery. They're getting to the point now where some of the scrolls that are rolled up that are too fragile to unroll, that they can actually use like MRI machines. They can take pictures of the thing, and then through computer analysis of it, they can digitally unroll it. They can figure out what layer it's on and how it meets up with different things, and now they can digitally unroll it because the ink sort of phosphoresces because there's some metallic things in it and things, so they can relay these things. They can see into these scrolls that they had not been able to see into before because they're too fragile. Pretty fantastic stuff. Really neat. I hope they'll tour again sometime. I hope that they'll have a chance to tour around because to see them in person is really pretty extraordinary.
I saw them in Grand Rapids in Panhandle.
Yeah.
Did you see them?
I saw them in at the Field Museum
Okay.
in Chicago in the late 90s. Yeah, absolutely worth it. So I encourage you to come and sort of take a peek at it in person here. But I'm going to show a brief, hopefully we'll show a brief video. We'll see if it gets it. See if it works.
Under lock and key for over 40 years, the Great Isaiah Scroll was stored underground in Jerusalem until displayed in 2008 for just a few months.
In 1947, 7 scrolls were found in caves at Qumran, the original Dead Sea Scrolls. They're considered one of the greatest finds of the modern era, and the 2,000-year-old Great Isaiah Scroll is the most famous.
It contains over 25% of all the biblical text among the scrolls. Nearly every part of the 66 chapters of Isaiah are intact. Its fragile condition requires it be kept in a temperature-controlled underground vault.
Museum of the Bible displays a facsimile of the Great Isaiah Scroll, allowing generations of people to view and engage with the Bible in all its unifying influence over the centuries.
Brought to you by Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C.
Always wanted to go there.
Yeah, I think we need to make a trip. Have you been there?
Yeah.
We definitely need to make a trip out there.
It's a good place for the Bible.
One of the Jim Veltz, who was one of our LCMS seminary professors at St. Louis, is one of their curators there. He's helping to I don't know what his exact position and title is there, but that's he works through that. So yeah, take a look at this at some point to be able to see what we're working with here. And what's particularly interesting about Hebrew and things is that there are no vowels in Hebrew. It wasn't until about the 1100s that the Masoretic Jewish community began putting in vowel symbols to help in reading and speaking of what those things are. So you can see in these texts there are no vowel points on there. I mean, if you think this looks like chicken scratch, when you put the vowel pointing back into it, it looks even tougher. But reading from right to left and top to bottom, across there is how the text works. Dave?
They said those were the facsimiles in the museum.
Yes.
Where are the originals?
Jerusalem.
Oh,
Yeah, they're in Israel. They're in Israel. Israel is extremely protective of the find. It's their Jewish text primarily, and so they're very much. They don't loan them out, which is why it was such a big deal when some of them were able to be toured. It was quite a gift.
No question.
Just stretch. Okay. Yeah.
I wonder where they had them, so that I wonder if that was down in the ground when the Iranian rockets.
Yeah, I don't know. It says that underground vaults and things like that. So yeah, I imagine there's quite a bit of protection. Yeah, Paula?
This is just on the sidebar. Jim Belts, he was at in Fort Wayne, right?
St. Louis.
What was he ever in Fort Wayne?
Yes.
Because because I knew Fort Wayne, and his wife grew up in South Amherst.
Yes. Oh, here. You know, oh, really?
And then his wife was one of the cousins who got out graduated from high school.
Oh, wow.
So I got to know her. I think her name was Judy. There was Judy and Margaret, and a bunch of girls.
Nice. A small world.
Yeah.
He wrote a book on how to read the Bible. So there's a whole study on how do you read the Bible. It's called hermeneutics. It's how you read Scripture as it's supposed to be in things. It's called What Does This Mean? It's like how do we get meaning out of the biblical text and things like that. We all have to read it as first-year seminarians, and he had all sorts of diagrams and sort of the way he described it. We always end up sort of saying, "Yeah, exactly, Jim. What does this mean?" We don't know what you're talking about sometimes. It's very, very helpful. So. All right. So you can actually go to your in your handout, the last 2 pages, 2 stapled pages before, 2 stapled sheets, the last 4 pages. And I know it's small print. I'm sorry. The very end, it's actually, they're not slides anymore. Those are copies of the Lutheran Study Bible, for the introductory components there from Lutheran Study Bible. I'm not sure if you can, I know it's a little bit faint in some spots. No, keep going. Let's see. Yes, yeah, Isaiah with an angel picture, there it is. Along the top is a timeline. It shows the reign of Uzziah or Azariah, you have 2 names. And 740 is the call of Isaiah. 722 is when Israel or Samaria falls to Assyria. 701, Sennacherib besieges Jerusalem under Hezekiah. And then in 696 is when Manasseh begins his reign in Judah as king, and who will be essentially the last one before they go off into exile as well. Along the left-hand side there, you've got some helpful overviews of the author and the dates, different places that are mentioned, people that are in there. You got Isaiah the prophet, and you have Isaiah's 2 sons, Shear Jashub and Maher Shalahazbaz. I love that name. And then Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and Rezin. Some long gospel themes there and some memorable verses. The Song of the Vineyard, the Temple Vision, Emmanuel and his reign, which will be called Wonderful Counselor, and Suffering Servant, things like that.
Why does it say Isaiah the prophet?
Where?
Right under people. On that overview.
Isaiah. Isaiah, and then there's a semicolon there that you can't read, and then then there's another character called the prophetess. There's a semicolon.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not, the prophetess does not describe Isaiah. It's a reference to his wife, which by prophetess it's often just used in the Old Testament as the wife of a prophet. Not that she was given any particular revelation or anything like that, but rather just Mrs. Prophet. And she has the 2 kids, Shear Jashub and Maher Shalahazbaz. And those names are significant. We're going to talk about those names eventually. So keep practicing them. Luther did introductions to all the books of the Bible when he was translating them, and a little excerpt from that for us to read here. Luther on Isaiah says, "If anyone would read the holy prophet Isaiah with profit and understanding him better, let him not ignore this advice and instruction of mine, unless he has better advice or is himself better informed. Listen to me unless you think you're smarter than me. In the first place, let him not skip the title at the beginning of this book, chapter 1, verse 1, but learn to understand it as thoroughly as possible in order that he may not imagine he understands Isaiah very well and then have someone charge him with never having even understood the title in the first line, let alone the whole prophet. The title is to be regarded really as a gloss and a light upon the whole book. Isaiah himself, as through his finger, points his readers to this title as stating the occasion and reason for his book. I say to him who ignores or does not understand the title that he should let the prophet Isaiah alone, or at least that he will not understand him thoroughly. So like if you're not going to look at the title of that first sentence, just leave him alone. For it is impossible to mark or perceive the prophet's words and meaning properly and clearly without this thorough understanding of the title. When I speak of the title, I do not mean that you should read or understand the words Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, etc., but that you should take in hand the last book of Kings and the last book of Chronicles and grasp them well, especially the events, the speeches, the incidents that occurred under the kings named in the title for Isaiah, clear to the end of those books. For if one would understand the prophecies, it is necessary that one know how things were in the land, how matters lay, what was in the mind of the people, what plans they had with respect to their neighbors, friends, and enemies, and especially what attitude they took in their country toward God and toward the prophet, whether they held to his word in worship or to idolatry. And really, this is a helpful way to understand how to read all the Bible. We understand it in context, understanding its audience, its author, the purposes for which God established the book, what it's trying to say to its original hearers, and how that relates to who we are and how what God did for us in those passages and how they apply to us here and now. Okay? So, the ending of the books of 2 Chronicles and 2 Kings covers the kings that are mentioned in Isaiah's time of ministry. Sort of the end of the kings. He's at the end. He dies, and then shortly thereafter, they're taken off into exile. No more kings. So we're going to look a little bit at 2 Chronicles, in particular at Uzziah, but take some time and look through 26 through 32 of 2 Chronicles, and then into 2 Kings as well, just to get an idea of like what all's in play here. Why is God proclaiming these things about their ungodliness and unfaithfulness, kind of back and forth between faithful and unfaithfulness. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, we have the reign of King Uzziah. And we know the name Uzziah because I think when you think of Isaiah's call into the ministry in Isaiah chapter 6, it begins with, in the year that King Uzziah died. Well, here's the preview to that. Well, before King Uzziah died, he was made king. So all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. And here's kind of what Uzziah was building about. Amaziah built Eloth and restored it to Judah, and after the king slept with his fathers. Uzziah was 16 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. That's a long kingship, too. One of the longest in the records of kings as well. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all his father Amaziah had done. That's good news, because throughout all the kings and Samuel and Chronicles and things, it's when they said he did not do what was right, or he continued in the evil that his fathers had done, especially followed in the ways of Manasseh. That's always the bad one. But this is good news, that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all his father Amaziah had done. He set himself to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. And as long as he sought the Lord, God made him prosper. Turning the page, unfortunately. He went out and made war against the Philistines and broke through the walls of Gath and the walls of Jabneh and the walls of Shad. He built cities in the territories and elsewhere among the Philistines. God helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabians and against all these folks. And his fame spread over even to the border of Egypt, where he became very strong. He built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate and the valley gate and at the angle and fortified them, and towers in the wilderness. He cut out many cisterns where he had large herds, both in the Shephelah and in the plain, so hill country, and in the low places. And he had farmers and vine dressers in the hills and in the fertile lands, for he loved the soil. He was a man of the earth. He was a farmer. He liked having people work the earth.
Yeah.
I had people do it. Moreover, he had an army of soldiers under the king's commanders. He had, verse 12, the whole number of the heads of his father's houses of mighty men of valor was 2,600. So 2,600 sort of dedicated men-at-arms who were sort of the real tough guys. They were the professional soldiers. And under their command was an army of 307,500 who could make war with mighty power to help the king against his enemies. And he decked them out, prepared all of them army shields and spears and helmets and coats of mail, bows and stones for slinging. And this is such an interesting verse. In Jerusalem, he made machines invented by skillful men to be on the towers in the corners to shoot arrows and great stones. What did he have? Catapults and crossbow kind of things. Yeah, stuff like that. Technological advances. And his fame spread far, for he was marvelously helped until he was strong. All things going good for him because he feared the Lord. But when he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction. Things are going so great, and then not. For he was unfaithful to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. But Azariah the priest went in after him, 80 priests of the Lord who were men of valor. So 80 priests who were also soldiers. And they withstood King Uzziah, which had to take a lot of courage, and said to him, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Go out of the sanctuary, for you have done wrong, and it will bring you no honor from the Lord God." This is a careful warning, not only to the Jewish people from that point, but also that we should keep in mind as well. It says we should worship God on his terms, not on our own terms. It's presumptuous for us to come in and say, well, I can worship God however I want, ignoring the ways which God has given us to worship him. So they said, look, yes, we need to burn the incense, but it is not given for you to do it. You are a king, and we're the priests, and we're the ones that are supposed to do that for you. So you're taking things out of order. You're out of your office. And it's important for us to keep in mind that we have certain callings and roles that we need to maintain by God's blessing and by his direction. And they even tell them, burning this incense will bring you no honor from the Lord God. This is a destructive thing. We need to worship God on his terms, not on our own. How do you think Uzziah took it? Well, Uzziah was very angry. Now he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And when he became angry with the priests, leprosy broke out on his forehead in the presence of the priests in the house of the Lord by the altar of incense. So this is a huge issue now, because not only is he not even supposed to be in there, he's certainly not supposed to be in there burning the incense, and now he's unclean. He's not even supposed to be at the temple with leprosy, let alone inside the temple itself, let alone trying to burn all these things. Just becoming a great uncleanness. Now visible on his forehead is the uncleanness of him stepping out of his office to do something that was not given for him to do. Lest anybody wonder, well, couldn't it be okay if he just went and did that? Well, now he's got leprosy, so certainly. And Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests looked at him, and behold, he was leprous on his forehead. And they rushed him out quickly, and he himself hurried to go out, because the Lord had struck him. It's like, we got to get you out of here. And he was like, yep, I'm out of here. King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death. Being a leper, lived in a separate house, for he was excluded from the house of the Lord, and Jotham his son was over the king's household, governing the people of the land. Now, the rest of the acts of Uzziah, from first to last, Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, wrote. And Uzziah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the burial field that belonged to the kings, for they said, he is a leper. And Jotham, his son, reigned in his place. In chapter 27, you're going to hear that Jotham followed in the ways of his father, but the people began worshiping other gods. And he kind of let them do it. And so you begin to see through Jotham them falling away, and then you get to Ahaz, and that's really no good. And then Hezekiah kind of recovers some things, but then it gets worse. So this is kind of the context leading up to Isaiah's call into the ministry, is that you've got a king who is trying to be faithful, and the climate of the country at that time was, things were good. They had a strong army, they had a good economy, they were renowned in the opinions of their neighbors. You know, they're like, we're not going to fight against them. They got a big army that was pretty strong. So, you know, things were very good in that respect. Everything, because they were following in the Lord was blessing them in all these things. But then as Jotham comes in, they begin to forsake the ways of the Lord in the south. And in the northern kingdom, they're totally apostate. And that's why Isaiah's prophecies begin with judgment against the northern kingdom, and then judgment against the nations in his condemnation of them.
Pastor?
Yeah.
So, with King Uzziah's pride in the end there, do we still consider him to be faithful and successful as a king?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, so then 27 through 32 continues the rest of that history. And so I'll be gone next week. I'm going to have Reverend Streeper will either look at the first couple chapters of Isaiah leading up to chapter 6, or plus something else for you. And we'll pick up at that one. So there's our start. And if you're looking for, as far as commentaries go, like this is the commentary I'm looking at. This is chapters 1 through 12. There's like 5 volumes of commentary for the book of Isaiah. That's why we're not going through verse by verse.